That's the sound of week 46, if anyone's counting. 46 weeks of my eyes snapping open somewhere between 2:45 and 3:30 in the morning, heart already racing before my feet even hit the cold floor. And listen, it's not some holy, the Lord woke me up to pray kind of thing. I wish it were. No, this is the ugly kind of awake, the kind where your brain just starts scrolling through every failure, every unpaid bill, every prayer you whispered that still seems to be sitting in some heavenly inbox marked unread. The coffee's cold before I even drink it. Story of my life lately. Third rejection email this month came through yesterday afternoon. You know the template, we were impressed by your qualifications, however. I've memorized the however font by now. It's always the same sans serif, polite little dagger. And the medical bills for my mom's treatment? Still sitting on the counter, unopened, like they might disappear if I just don't look at them long enough. So here I am, 3:17 in the morning, wondering if God's been screening my calls. Because when you've been doing all the right things, praying, believing, declaring, showing up, tithing, speaking life, naming it and claiming it and whatever else the books tell you to do, and the door still doesn't budge, and the phone still doesn't ring, and the breakthrough still feels like a fairy tale someone told you to keep you quiet, something inside you starts to calcify. Hope gets thin. Thin like that old t-shirt you keep sleeping in because you can't afford new ones. Thin like the margin between what you believe and what you actually see. Maybe you know this feeling. Not the Instagram-filtered version of waiting, the real one. The one where you've done the prayer walks and the fasting and the I trust you, Lord declarations through gritted teeth, and still, nothing. The door's still shut. The inbox is still empty. The healing hasn't come. The relationship hasn't been restored. And you start to wonder if maybe, just maybe, God's promises were for everyone else but somehow skipped your house. Like spiritual gaslighting, you keep telling yourself God is faithful, but your circumstances keep whispering, really? Where's the evidence? Last Tuesday, I was standing in the hospital parking lot at dusk. You know that moment when the sun's almost gone and the streetlights flicker on one by one? I was leaning against my car, watching the windows of the building where my mom was sleeping, and I said it out loud, not a polite prayer, not a polished declaration. Just, are you even listening? Because from where I'm standing, it sure looks like you've forgotten this address. No lightning. No voice from heaven. Just the sound of an ambulance in the distance and the cold wind cutting through my jacket. But this morning, this 3:17 a.m. morning, something shifted. Not because a miracle dropped out of the sky. Not because the bank account suddenly multiplied. But because a verse I've read 100 times before just wouldn't leave my head. You know how that happens? Like a song stuck on repeat, but it's scripture, and it's poking at something you've been trying to ignore. Revelation 3 verse 8. I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. I used to read that verse like a vending machine promise. Insert faith, receive open door. The job. The breakthrough. The instant, visible, Instagram-worthy miracle. That's what I thought the open door was supposed to look like. Something big and obvious and right now. But sitting here in the dark kitchen, watching the steam curl off a cup of coffee I'm not even drinking, I think God's been trying to whisper something different. Something I wasn't ready to hear until now. What if the open door isn't always the one you've been pounding on? I'm not a faith hero. Let's get that straight right now. I'm the guy who cried in his car last week. The guy who sent angry, tear-stained journal entries to heaven. The guy who's doubted, questioned, and come dangerously close to walking away because the waiting was just too heavy. If you're looking for a polished, suit anti-testimony, I'm not your guy. But if you need someone who gets it, the exhaustion, the confusion, the almost gave-up moments, then pull up a chair. This kitchen's small, but there's room. Here's a memory I haven't thought about in years. When I was 28, I almost landed my dream job. I mean, I was this close, final interview, handshakes, the whole thing. I was already mentally decorating the office. And then, at the last second, the door slammed shut. No explanation. Just a generic rejection after weeks of "you're the perfect candidate." I was devastated. I remember telling God, seriously? This was the one. This was the door I was supposed to walk through. 6 months later, that company filed for bankruptcy. Everyone I would have worked with was laid off overnight. I didn't see it then. I was too busy being angry at the closed door to realize it was actually a shield. And that brings me to the thing I'm learning, slowly, painfully, at 3 a.m. in a quiet kitchen: the delay is not always denial. Sometimes, the closed door is not rejection. Sometimes, it's divine protection. Sometimes, God's "no" or "not yet" is the only thing standing between you and a disaster you can't see coming. His silence isn't abandonment. It might just be the sound of Him standing guard over a future you're not ready to enter yet. So here's the truth I'm holding onto with both hands tonight, and I want you to hold it too. Sometimes the closed door isn't there to reject you. It's there to protect you from what God knows you're not ready to face. But here's the question that's been gnawing at me, and maybe it's gnawing at you too. How do you actually believe that when you've been waiting so long that your heart has started to grow calloused? When hope doesn't feel like an anchor anymore, it feels like a cruel joke? When the door's been shut for 46 weeks, or 46 months, or 46 years, and you're not sure you even remember what it feels like to hope without flinching? Because that's the real battle, isn't it? Not the waiting itself, but what the waiting does to you. How it slowly, quietly erodes your ability to trust. How it makes you second-guess every good thing, afraid to get your hopes up because the disappointment might finally be the one that breaks you for good. I found the answer not in a church pew, but in the ICU at 2 a.m. Let me tell you about that night. My mother had just come out of a 6-hour surgery. The waiting room had emptied hours ago, just me, a vending machine that ate my dollar, and the kind of silence that presses against your eardrums. And somewhere around the 14th hour of sitting in that plastic chair, staring at the ventilator tube doing the breathing my mother couldn't do for herself, I stopped praying pretty prayers. I said it out loud. Quiet, but out loud. I don't understand your plan. I'm tired. I'm doubting. The prayer that night wasn't a prayer, it was a sigh. The faith I had wasn't a fortress, it was a single freight thread, and I was holding on by fibers. Maybe you've been there. That place where the words won't come. Where "how are you" gets answered with "fine" because the truth would take too long and cost too much. The place where hope doesn't feel like an anchor, it feels like a memory of something you used to have. If that's you right now, I need you to hear this: you're not failing. You're in the middle of a story that hasn't turned the page yet. Here's what I didn't tell anyone during those 3 years. 3 years of praying for a door to open. 3 years of waking up every morning and checking my inbox like my life depended on it, only to find nothing. Or worse, the polite rejection. The "we've decided to go in a different direction." The "we'll keep your resume on file." The silence that somehow hurts more than a no. I remember a specific Tuesday. I'd applied for a position that felt like it was made for me. The job description could have been my biography. I prayed over that application. I fasted. I did everything you're supposed to do. And when the rejection came, a 3-sentence email at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, because of course it was a Friday, I sat at my kitchen table and felt something I'm ashamed to admit. Envy. Raw, ugly, green envy. I went home that night and did something I've never told anyone. I unfollowed my closest friend on social media. Not because I didn't love her, but because I couldn't bear to watch another person receive the very thing I'd been begging God for. Every post felt like evidence that God had a favorite child, and it wasn't me. That's the ugly truth of long waiting. It doesn't just test your patience. It tests your character. It exposes the rot you didn't know was there. The comparison. The scorekeeping. The quiet, toxic thought that maybe God's goodness runs out before it reaches you. But here's where the story turns. And I need you to lean in, because this is the part that rearranged something in my soul. I was reading Psalm 5. David, a man who knew something about waiting, about being hunted, about doors that wouldn't open, writes this line: "Surely, Lord, you bless the righteous, you surround them with your favor as with a shield." A shield. I'd always read that verse as comfort, as a warm, soft promise. But that night, in my mother's hospital room, the word hit me differently. A shield isn't a door opener. A shield doesn't clear the path or remove the obstacle. A shield blocks things. It deflects. It takes the hit so you don't have to. And the question rose up, unbidden: what if the favor of God doesn't always look like an open door? What if sometimes it looks like a closed one? What if the rejection I'd been mourning wasn't rejection at all, but protection? What if the no I'd been resenting was actually a shield, positioned between me and something I couldn't see coming? I started replaying my life through that lens. The job I almost got at 28, the one that felt like the one. The door slammed shut at the last second, and I was devastated. 6 months later, the company collapsed. Everyone laid off. No warning. If I'd walked through that door, I would have walked straight into a disaster I couldn't see. The relationship I begged God to save, the one that ended in a phone call and 2 weeks of not eating. She married someone else a year later, and I thought I'd never recover. 5 years on, I ran into her at a grocery store. We talked. And I realized, standing in the cereal aisle, that we would have made each other miserable. The closed door wasn't cruelty. It was mercy. Here's the truth I'm learning, slowly and painfully: what I call failure, God calls protection from a larger failure. What I call rejection, God calls redirection. What I call silence, God calls the sound of Him standing guard over a future I'm not ready to enter yet. A friend of mine told me a story I can't shake. Years ago, he was supposed to be on a flight. Had the ticket. Had the boarding pass. Got to the gate and the flight was overbooked. They bumped him. He was furious. Argued with the gate agent. Called customer service. Nothing worked. He watched his plane pull away from the jet bridge without him on it. That plane crashed. No survivors. He told me this story with tears in his eyes, 20 years later. And he said, "I spent that whole day angry at God for the delay. I didn't know the delay was my deliverance." How many flights have we been bumped from without knowing why? How many times has a delay, a denial, a closed door been the only thing standing between us and a wreckage we never saw coming? The mercy of God sometimes wears the uniform of rejection. Sometimes the answer to "God, open this door" is "No, child, because I love you too much to let you walk through it." But here's the thing. Understanding this doesn't make the waiting hurt less. Knowing that closed doors might be shields doesn't take away the ache of standing in front of one, hand on the handle, wondering why it won't budge. The theology of protection doesn't erase the 3 a.m. loneliness. It doesn't fill the empty inbox. It doesn't silence the whispers that maybe you've been forgotten. So what do we do? What do we do when we understand the theory but we're still living in the tension? What do we do when tomorrow morning we wake up, check our phones, and the door is still closed? Because that's where a lot of us are, isn't it? We've heard the sermons. We know the verses. We can quote the promises. But the gap between knowing and feeling, that gap is where faith either deepens or dies. And I want to be honest with you about what I'm learning to do in that gap. Not because I've mastered it, but because I'm in the trenches with you, and I've found something that's keeping me alive. Sangne, truak kai ban kim tra dein thoai, truak kai anoi that von uav he kung tua lam amodi du cockbeat. Tua muon ban dung lai. Nai luke nai. Dung cham veo mon hindu. Dung mo email. Dung kim tra tin nan. Thaveo du, hey dat bon te fi qua ban len gek tre nai 6 tri tre tim dang dap. Cam nan nip dap du. Cam nan hoyam tu long bon te lan toa. De kong chi la mot dong tok Thursday John. De la mot han dong duk tin tien tri. Bandang noi voi chin min va voi moi the luke vo hinrang, tua van con song. Tua van con hai vong. Va tua chan tin, nai ca kai tua kong hu. Hit veo that sao. Jo hoi tho trong baga. Roy tho ra tu tu. Lam lai lan nua. Lan nai, kai bam tho ra, he buong bo mot noi so. Chi mot thoi. Ko the la noi so ve hoa don chua ton ton. Ko the la noi so ve moi quan he dang ran nut. Ko the la noi so rang ban de by lang quain. Hey tho no areva by geo, hey kung tua kong gwin ye kong fi bang in hung loi ho my qua modium usi su tren bok john, wa bang in hung loi run ray qua modi nue dang dung trong can be piluk 3 geo sang, take him a whites a fi nue lan, and hung van chan angwak matlan. Lei cha thien thuang. Con den truok nai kong fi voi duk tin vung vang nu nuide. Con den voi ban te run re va tre tim con de gi ngo. Con kong hu tai sa kan qua kia van don. Con kong hu tai sa loi kong win qua con duong nu roi veo im lang. Con kong hu tai sa nuoi kok nan duok fepla, con ti van chodoi tuan nai qua tuan kok, thang nai qua thang kok, nam Thursday bon moi sa qua su chodoi kong hoi ket. And hung hom ne, con chan mot du kok. Con chan tin rang suam lang quan icon phyla su vang mat. Con chan tin rang su cham tre quan icon phyla su tu choi. Con chan tin rang bon te dang don kan quai truok mat con kung chin la bon te dang che chan con koi and hung du con kong the. Chaoi, con kong win cho nuoi dang ne con luk nai. Nuoi dang cho doi mot song beak. Nuoi dang chodoi su chua lan trong koda. Nuoi dang chodoi moti moi quan he duok fu koi. Nuoi dang chodoi tai chin duok jai q. Nuoi dagon nu buong sui. Shabit ho dang o dao. Shabit kan fong toi tam ma ho dang goi trong du. Shabit and hung jayat nuok mat ho de kok kai kong ai nin the. Con xin sha gap go ho nai tai noi du. Kong fi bang emoti fep lao, and hung bang emoti suben and lang suben and vud kwamo hu beat, suben and kong futhwak veo honkin, suben and noi rang, kong by lang quain. Kong by bo qua. Kong byuk di moti min. Thuanan rang kong ko tat ca ka traloi. Kong beat kai now kan qua sing mo. Kong beat tai sa han trin nai di den vei. And hung con beat dang tin k. Nai la dang de dan dat con quai hung thun lung toi tam not. Nai la dang de jacon song sat quai hung dem con tuong minasiji usi na. Nai la dang de chung min het lan nai den lan kok rang su ton tin qua nai lan han su that by qua con, tin yu qua nai sao han noi da qua con, wakahoch qua nai chow han su hu beat qua con. Va bai geo, tua muan wa ban lam mot du. De kong fi la mot u ka de tang tuon tok jo video. De la mot han dong dao fuk. Trong fan ben luan ben dui, heviet, kan nan on hu qua chua va tin ke loi diem qua nai tuan nai. Heviet no ra go tung chu mot. Dung chi gi trong dao. He de gon te ban cham veo ban phim va tuen sung duk tin qua ban. Boy vi loi noi ko gwin nong. Va kai ban sung bo du gi du, bandang gio amoni hat jong trong the gioi vio hin. Bandang noi voi moi the luk bon toi rang, tua kong by din nia bioi in hung gi tua the. Tua duok din nia bioi dang tua tin. Va de kong fi la fep mau tuct. Tua se kong hua voi ban rang game I can kwasin mo tong. In hung tuako the hua voi ban unai, kai ban dalfuk thoi diem kwai chua, ban duok jai fong koi gen nong fi kim so moi Thursday. Va su dalfuk du chin no la buk dao tien kwa tu du. Tua beat ban met moi. Tua thay ban. Tua beat ban de tuk de luk 3 geo sang voi tre tim dap thin tik vi en hung ka hoi kong ko loi dap. Tua beat ban de mim koi voi dong angip trong kai ben trong ban dang vi ovan. Tua beat ban de kong win cho den kai kong kon lon out in oi, varoi ban chin goi du trong im lang, tuoi lu ko ai dang lang ne kong. Tua kong vei. Tua kong dung tren buk chow de noi voi ban in hung du nai. Tua dang dung nai ben kan ban, trong kong imonichi en hao, voi kong in hung vetso, kong in hung gi ngio, kong in hung dem mat ngo. En hung chung ta se kong now buk teep. Kong fi vi chung ta man mi. Kong fi vi chung ta ko tat ca ka traloi. Mabio vi ko amoni bante vio hin dang nam le te kia kwa chung ta, bante de by din dam thung, bante de chien tang su chet, bante kong ba gio biwamare. De la chan el y tua muan ban mang theo ham ne, kak sa veo tam triva mang veo tuan moi, kan kwa dong ham ne ko the la buk tuang ba vi ban koi ge mai ma chua de the truak. Ban kong nin the in hung gi nai the. Ban kong beat in hung gi nai beat. Koan hung tai hoa de duok chan lai. Koan hung sai lam de duok nan chan. Koan hung kan duong ban de kong fi buk veo and hung kan duong dan su hui diet ma ban kong he beat. Ba moti ge now do, ko the kong fi hum ne, ko the kong fi thang nai, and hung emoti ge now do, ban se nin like in kwa dong nai va ban se thot len, kam on chua vi nai de kong cho kan du kan muon. Kam on chua vi nai de bo vi kan koi du kan kong thay. Du la duk tin truong tan. Du la duk tin kong doi hoi fi hu truok kai tin. Du la duk tin in oi rang, du nai kong ba gio traloi ka hoi kwa kan ven tin ke tam long kwa nai. Vive, toi twin bo tren kuok doi ben ham ne va toi muon ben twin bo kong toi, du chi ti tam tron long, toi kong by lang quain. Toi kong by bo qua. Toi kong biuk dmot min. Su cham tre nai kong fi la su tu choi. Suan lang nai kong fi la su vang mat. Kan qua dong nai kong fi la in gio cut? Chua dang han dong trong in hung du toi kong fei. Nai dang chuan by in hung du toi chua san song don nan. Va thoi diem quanes kong fi thoi diem qua toi la hon hao. Tuano lai hin on kan bep luke 3 geo sang. En hung lan nai, el white sa fi kong kan nuoi lan. Koamoti su ben in wa trong kong john du. Motsu ben in kong fi vi hon kan de thay doi, ma vi toi de thay doi. Tuada in gung chien dao voi dang chien dao cho toi.